If you're dealing with any type of customer data, then churn analysis is an important skill in your arsenal. In this video, I will show you how to build this amazing churn analysis dashboard from scratch. We will start it from the very beginning, that is, we will see the entire ETL process in a SQL Server database. We will understand how to build databases, tables, and views to use in your visualization. Then we will start building our Power BI data model and visualization. But that is not all. I have a special treat for all of you today. We will build a machine learning model to predict the customer churn on a new dataset and then use that final prediction to build another page in this dashboard to create a churner profile. It's going to be a jam-packed session with lots of interesting topics. So if you're interested, then keep watching. We are working with this telecom customer churn data. Now, if you look at the data, the first column, which is the customer ID, this is a unique identifier for each row. What I meant by this is that there is only one entry for each customer in this data. Following that, we have a couple of columns that have some information about demographic and geographic information. Next to that, the data talks about referrals made by the customer and various services the customer has subscribed, like internet, streaming services, etc. Then we have a couple of payment and revenue related columns. And finally, we have the most important column, which is the customer status column. This talks about whether a customer has been churned or they are still with the company. Now, if the customer is churned, then we have two columns, which is churn category and churn reason, which talks about the reason for them being churned. You can download this data from the link in the description so that you can follow along with me. So if you've done that, then let's get started. Alright, so now let us quickly look at the agenda that we have for today. The project goal is pretty straightforward. We have to create an entire ETL process in a database and then a Power BI dashboard based on that database to utilize the customer data and achieve these goals. The first one is to analyze customer data at all the levels which are available. Second one is to study churner profile and identify areas for implementing marketing campaigns. And thirdly, we have to identify a method to predict future churners. Finally, the metrics that we require in this entire project would be total customer, total churn, churn rate, and new joiners. So the first step in churn analysis is to load the data from our source file. For this purpose, we'll be using Microsoft SQL Server because it is a widely used solution across the industry and also because a full-fledged database system is better at handling recurring data loads and maintaining data integrity compared to an Excel file. In order for us to run our SQL queries, Microsoft provides us with a GUI interface which is known as SQL Server Management Studio. You can download the latest version from the link provided in the description. For those of you who have never worked with SQL Server before, don't worry, I will keep it very light and easy to understand. We will not dig too much in detail into SQL Server today because that's a big topic in itself and need a separate video. Now, once you've installed SQL Server Management Studio and opened it, this is the first window that you'll be greeted with. Now, there are many information on this window. The one that we are concerned with is the server name. So copy this server name somewhere. We will need this at a later stage when we are working with Power BI. Also, you will see a checkbox here which says Trust Server Certificate. Enable this checkbox and then press on Connect. Now on the left side window, you will see the Object Explorer here. There are many folders on this. Again, we are right now concerned with only this folder which says Databases. This is where we will be creating our database and eventually that database will host our entire data. So in this SQL Server environment, there are three main steps that we need to perform. First one is create a database. Second one, create a table within that database, and then finally load our data into that table. So the first step is to create a database. To do that, first we need to understand how to open a new query window where we will be writing our SQL queries. To open up a new query window, you can just click on this button which says New Query. This is a query editor. Now I'm going to write a SQL query, create database, and the database name will be db_churn. Okay. and I'm going to just run this. Now, once you run this statement and open up this database folder, you'll see a new database created here which says db_churn. Now, if you expand this db_churn, there are many folders here. Right now, these are just system generated folders, and you will see one folder which says tables. This is where our final table will be loaded. Okay. Now that we have created our database, comes the second step, which is the table creation step. Now, typically in a working environment, the second step, which is table creation, and the data loading part happens separately. So once we have created the table and the schema of the table, we use tools like SSIS to create our data pipeline to load the data on a regular basis. But for now, we will not be getting into SSIS, and we're going to complete the second and the third step in a single step using the import wizard provided within the database. So all you have to do is you have to right click on this database here, which you have just created, select task, and then from this select import flat file. Now on this pop-up window, you can just simply click next. And on this page, you'll be asked to supply a path where your file will be loaded, which means the raw data that you want to load into the database. So I'm going to just browse my file path quickly. Now the next section is for the table name. Now, usually when we load the data for the first time into our database, in every organization, it is kept in a staging file. Now that staging file will contain the raw data as it is and will not have any alterations or modifications. So we're going to do just that. And I'm going to call this SCG_churn. And the table schema will be DBO only. This is the default schema which is there. By the way, DBO means database owner. Okay. And I'm going to press on next. It's going to show you a preview of the data which is being loaded. Next. Now on this page, it gives you an option to change the data type or some other features within your data before importing. Two things that I would like to do here is, first of all, allow nulls. This is because I know that there might be few null values within this data set. So I do not want to get an error while importing. So I'm going to allow nulls for now. Also, I'm going to keep this customer ID as primary key. And since I know that customer ID column does not have any nulls, and ideally primary key column should not have any nulls, I'm going to just remove this allow nulls from this. And finally, you see these data types which says bit. I'm going to change this to a varchar 50 because I have observed that this data type gives an error while importing the data in. So I'm going to just avoid that and change this to a varchar 50 quickly. Okay, perfect. And you can click on next now and then finish. Now, ideally, you should receive this message which says operation complete and insert data has been a success. Once you get to this window, you can just close this. Now, if I open up this particular expand icon here besides the table, I should see that new table which we just inserted. If not, you should click on this refresh button. And now if you see, I can see this staging churn table here. Now that we have our basic data in, let's do some quick data exploration. First of all, I would like to check a couple of values within my columns. So first of all, let's write a select statement and see whether we have all the data there or not. So I'm going to just write select star from stg_churn. So I've got all the columns here. Okay, so now let's do some more data exploration. For that, I'm going to open up another query window by clicking on this new query button here. And what I would like to do is, because we have so many columns here, I would like to first check values in few of the columns and understand the data distribution. Like for example, we have this gender column. I would like to know how many items do we have in this gender column and what is actually the count of rows in each of those items. Also, I would need additional one more column which tells me the percentage distribution of those columns. Okay, so to do that, I'm gonna go to this new query window and we're gonna start with gender itself. So I'm gonna say select gender, count of gender, because we need the count of that gender column for each row item. And I'm gonna name this as total count. Now, because I said I wanted another column which will give me the percentage of each of those items against the grand total, I'm going to create that now. I'm going to say count and gender, and I'm going to divide that with the count of total. And in order for us to get the count of total, I'm going to write another select statement, close this bracket so that we have a select statement inside those brackets, and then I'm going to name this percentage. Now I'm going to write my from clause. So from stg_churn, and because we are applying a count, which is an aggregation, alongside another categorical column, we have to apply a group by. So I'm going to say group by gender, okay, because that's the column we are using as a grouping criteria. Now if I run this right now, the percentages, the third column that we created, will show me as 0. Now if you see in the output, the percentage is 0. The reason for that is in SQL Server, when I apply this division onto two integer values, so the count of gender and the select count for all, both of them are integer numbers. When I divide those numbers, I will only receive an integer number. I will not receive a float, okay? So that's why you're receiving 0 here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just multiply this by 1.0 so that first this count of gender is converted into a float, and then we can divide it, which will give me a float value. I'm going to run this again. Now if you see, it is giving me as 0.3692. Now if you want, you can use this column as it is, or else instead of 1.0, I can just multiply it by 100.0, which will give me 36.92, which means 36% and 63% for male and female individually. All right, let's write a couple of more queries like this to explore the data more. I'm going to use a similar kind of query for the contract column here. All the queries that I'm writing here, you will find all of them in the link in the description. You can copy paste if you like. Okay, so I'm going to just select this, execute, and month to month contract has 51% share in the entire data, and remaining have 22 and 26. Okay, perfect. Now let's explore the column which will be our most important column, which is the customer status column. Okay, now this column tells us whether the customer has stayed or churned, or a new customer has joined or not. So we're going to explore this now. Okay, so this tells us that customer who has churned from the organization is around 17.5%, which is a huge number in itself. Finally, I'm going to explore the state column and see how many states represent what percentage of values. However, in this, I'm going to just add one more clause, which is the order by clause, and I'm going to order it by percentage column in a descending order. Now this will show me which state has the highest percentage of contribution in our entire data. Okay, so I'm going to just execute this. Now instead of a 1.0, I'm going to multiply it by 100.0 and run it again. Now if you see the top 5 states, which represents the maximum percentages in terms of total row count. Okay, so similarly, you get the idea how to explore your data further. I'm going to write one last query just to show you one more technique to identify how many items do we have in a particular column, okay, without getting the actual count of it. So let's say, for example, I want to check internet type column, and I want to check how many separate items does this column has, and I mean distinct items. Okay, so for that, what you would do is you're going to say select, and you will write the keyword distinct and internet type, and then I'm going to just write the from clause so that it can give me the column names in the IntelliSense. And if you see, this is the internet type, and if I run this, it is giving me couple of items: fiber optics, cable, DSL, and we also have a null value. Okay, so now the next data exploration step that we would need is to identify how many columns have null values in it. Okay, which is a major factor in data cleaning. Null can create a lot of problems if you ignore it, so we should not bypass this step. So I'm going to open up another window here, new query window, and within this I'm going to paste a query which will check nulls in all the columns within our data. It's a long query. So again, this query will be in the description. You can copy paste if you like. Now what this query is doing is it's first assigning null values as 1 and remaining as 0, and then summing up those values for a particular column. So if I take this for example, it first checks whether customer ID has any null or not. If yes, then it assigns as 1, else 0, and then it sums the entire piece, and that column will be called as customer ID null count. And we're doing this for all the columns that we have. So if I run this now, you get this output, and if you scroll to the right, you will now start getting count of null values in all the columns. So wherever you see 0, that means that those column does not have any nulls. Wherever you see anything more than 0, that means that column has null values. So the next step would be to obviously remove these null values. And this is a step where we will be replacing our null values and inserting that data into a new table, which will be a production table. This table will be used as the source for our all upcoming steps. So this is the query for it. And if I explain the query, what I'm doing is I'm just simply selecting all the columns, and wherever we had nulls based on the previous query, which is this one, I have applied a condition which says if it contains null, which is this function is null, then assign it a certain value. So for value deal, I've assigned the null value as none, and similarly all the others. And all these value, once you have selected, this select is going into a new table, which will be prod churn. Now this is a new table that we are creating, and we are selecting this entire table into that new table. Now if you see, I've given it the database name, also the schema name, so that there is no confusion for SQL Server while inserting this table. So I'm going to run this. It says 6418 rows affected, which means our data has been inserted perfectly fine. If you do not see the table here on the left, then you can just click on refresh, and the table should appear on the Explorer window. Now that you have your final table, which will be used as a source, now I'm going to introduce you to a concept called views. Now in database, the main purpose of view is to create a virtual table. So this view will not have any physical presence on the database itself and will provide you with the output when a query calls for it. Views can be very effectively used in creating some complex queries and storing some data into it. Now views have its own advantages and disadvantages. We will not be going too much in detail into views, but I'm going to show you how to create a view. Click on this new query window again, and the keyword for creating a view is create view, and then you provide a view name. I would like to prefix my view with VW so that I know that it's a view. Churn data, okay, and then as. Now below that you can write your select statement. So I'm going to say select star from prod churn, which is the new table that we just created, where customer status in. Now in is again a keyword which helps us select multiple items within our filter. So I'm going to say churned and state. I'm going to run this. Now the second view that I would like to do is create view VW underscore join data as. I'm going to copy paste this query here, and in this it's just going to be equal to joined. I'm going to run this. Now if you observe the Explorer window and expand this view table here, you should see those two views that we just created, which is churn data and join data. Okay, so now from a SQL Server perspective, our work is done. Let's jump into Power BI to import this data in and then move forward from there. Okay, so now I have opened the Power BI desktop application. In this, I'm going to just click on this blank report icon, and this is where it will land. Now from this, I'm going to click on this get data and select SQL Server because that is our backend database. Now if you remember in the beginning, I told you to copy paste the server name. This is where we will be using that. And then now there are a couple of options. You can enter your database name, that is optional. Also, you can select the data connectivity mode. Now, import mode, what it does, it simply imports all the data within Power BI. And direct query mode creates a live connection between the Power BI interface and SQL Server. So which means whenever the data is updated, even without you explicitly refreshing, the data will get refreshed. Okay. I'm going to keep it as import. And there are some other advanced options where you can write your SQL statements to fetch the data, but this can have its own issues. I prefer creating all my views and tables in SQL Server itself and then importing it directly. Okay. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to enter any SQL statement here. I'm going to press OK. Now, if you see, it has shown me the server and the database name. You can expand this and it will show me all the tables and views which are already present. So now from this list, let's select prod churn, which is our production table. Now you might be thinking, if we were going to select prod churn, why did we create this two views? Trust me, this is going to be very crucial at the end. So stay with me on this. Okay. So for now, we're going to select prod churn and then let's transform this data instead of loading it. Okay. Because we're going to do some transformation steps before we could move into our visualization step. All right. So here is our Power Query window. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of new columns based on certain conditions. Okay. Now if you see at the end, this data set contains a column called customer status, which has three values, which is stayed, churned, and joined. Okay. But I would like to create another column, which would be a number column, which defines whether a certain row is for churned or if it's not. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on add column, create custom column, and I'm going to call this churn status. And the condition would be simple. If customer status column is equal to churned, then I need 1, else I need 0. Okay. I'm going to press OK. The new column has been created. But if you notice, the column here says the data type is text because it signifies with a ABC123 at the top left here. Okay. At the top left of the column. I'm going to click on this particular icon here. And instead of ABC123, I'm going to select this whole number. Because eventually I would like to use this column to do some calculations. After this, I'm going to create another column and let's call this monthly charge status. And the condition would be if monthly charge column is less than 20, then I need less than 20 text. Okay. Else if monthly charge column is less than 50, then it would be 20 to 50. Copy this line once more. And this time I'm going to say if monthly charge is less than 100, then make it 50 to 100. Finally, I can just say else, mark everything else as greater than 100. Okay. And then press OK. The reason we did this is because if you look at the monthly charge column, which is somewhere around here, right? We have a lot of values here. And it will be very difficult for us to create any kind of visualization using this, whether it be a chart or a drop down. Okay. So in order for us to use this, it's better to have some kind of range column, which we can use inside either a chart or a drop down. We'll decide what to do when we start creating the visualization. But for now, let's have this ready with us. So now let's go back to home in this tab and click on close and apply. This will apply all the transformations that we have done and then load your table onto the data model. Okay. And you would be able to see this table at the right hand side here. Now at this stage, it is a good point to save your dashboard. So I'm going to just simply press Ctrl S and save my file as churn analysis. Now before moving further, let's quickly look at the blueprint that we have or the agenda that we had to create our first page, which would be a summary or executive summary page. So as per the agenda, we have to cover a couple of broader categories of metrics. So one would be an overall level of numbers, like for example, total number of customers that we have, total number of joiners that we have, and then total number of churn, which is there in the data. And finally, churn rate, okay, which is nothing but total churn divided by total customers. Second, we have to divide our categories into further groups. First category would be demographic. So we would cover gender related visuals there and age related visuals there. Second one is your account related visuals, where we'll be covering payment methods, contract and tenure. Third is geographic, where we will be covering state related data. Then we're going to use the churn distribution. For that, we can look at churn category and churn reasons. And lastly would be services that are used by the customers. For that, we will be using internet type, and we will use all the services related to that customer, like for example, phone services, internet services, and all the others, right? There are multiple number of columns present in the data. So we're going to use all that and identify a way to fit all of that into this small real estate that we have here on the first page. All right. So before we start putting up charts into this, I would like to create few measures. Okay. And while creating measures, I personally like to keep the measures separate from our main table. That way, it's easier for me to find the measure and it's easier for me to edit the measure in case required in future. Okay. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dummy table. And for that, you can just click on this enter data here. It will open up and pop up wherein you can enter your data manually. I'm going to call this table TBL_measures. Okay. So that I know this is a table for measures. And then I'm going to create a dummy column. Let's call it Z_dummy. Okay. And then I'm going to load it. Remember, this table does not have any data in it. So that's why everything is empty. Now I have this table and have a demi column. That demi column is required. Otherwise, it will not create a table. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this 3 dot icon and I'm going to say new measure. And in this, I'm going to create a couple of measures. First one will be total customers. So instead of using the default implicit measure, I'm going to use an explicit measure and define how I'm going to count my customers. I'm going to say count, and I'm going to count customer ID column from the prod churn data. Now let's create a second measure, which will be new joiners. And I'm going to say calculate count customer ID from the prod churn data, and then apply a filter on customer status where it says joined. Next one, create another measure. I'm going to say total churn, and this time I'm going to say sum your churn status column. So remember the new column that we created in our transformation step. This is where we're going to use it. Okay. And finally, I'm going to create another measure, which will be our churn rate, which will be nothing but total churn divided by total customers. So the two new measures that we created, where you're going to use that and divide them. Okay. Again, keep saving your PBI file. It's a good practice so that you do not lose your work. Now let's start creating a visual. So the first item that we have to create is an overall number which depicts total customers, new joiners, total churn and churn rate. Okay. So I'm going to just drop in few cards to display those numbers. So first one is total customers. I'm going to click here. It will be a card. And I'm going to just simply place it here right now. Don't worry, we're going to format all these numbers pretty soon so that it looks aesthetically pleasing. This will be our new joiners. So I'm going to just drag new joiners here. I'm copy pasting each card here. Okay. And this will be our total churn. And if you observe, I'm just dragging my new measure onto the existing one that replaces the older one. Okay. And finally, I'm gonna create one for churn rate. Now churn rate, this should be a percentage. So I'm gonna format it accordingly. I only need 1 decimal values there. This one should be comma separated, total churn. So I'm gonna just click on comma separated here. I'm gonna do the same for remaining 2 cards. Now that our overall metric is completed, we're gonna dive into the individual categories that we had, which was demographic, account info, geographic, churn distribution and services. Okay. So for the demographic one, I'm gonna create a donut chart for my gender. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the total churn column along with this gender column here in the prod churn table. Okay. So I'm going to select gender and I'm going to select this donut visualization here. And along with this, I'm going to use this total churn inside the value. Now you can choose to display the labels in a different way. Like for example, right now, all the labels says 1K, but just in case you do not want that, you can change it, go into the formatting and in the details label and then click on values, you will find the property for changing these labels. Okay. Instead of this display units auto, I'm going to select none. Alright. Let's reduce the size a little bit. I'm going to improve the formatting for this in a while. But for now, I'm going to just keep it like this. The second visual for demographic, I'm going to use my age column. But the problem here is if I simply use the age column, this might be a problem because if you look at the age column here, there are so many values in this. And similar to the monthly charge column, if I try to create a visual out of it, I might not find it easy to understand or it might not be helpful. So in order to resolve that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another column which will group all those ages in certain buckets. For example, less than 20, 20 to 35, 35 to 50, and greater than 50. So let's do that first. I'm going to go to the transform data. And instead of creating that column in this main table, I'm going to create a reference of this table. Okay. So right click on the prod churn, click on reference. I'm going to call this mapping underscore age grp. Okay. For group. I'm going to just select this age column here, right click and click on remove other columns. This will remove all the other columns in your table. And by the way, the reason I created a reference is because if I create a duplicate, that duplicate table will also hit SQL Server when I refresh, which reduces the performance. Right now, if you look at this table, the source says prod churn. So whatever data prod churn got, this table will immediately fetch that instead of hitting SQL Server to get the data again, okay, which is an unnecessary step. So that's why I'm using a reference instead of the duplicate option here, okay. Going back to the mapping table here, I'm going to remove duplicates by clicking on this button here and clicking on remove duplicates. Now that I know that all the data in this are unique, I do not have any duplicates, I'm going to create my new column and let's name this age group. And I'm going to say if age is less than 20, then less than 20, else if age is less than 35, then 20 to 35, else if age is less than 50, then 35 to 50, else greater than 50. Now feel free to add more columns in this or more buckets in this. I felt that this is more than enough. That's why I'm doing like this. You can add, let's say for example, 50 to 60, greater than 60 and all those things, right? But I'm going to keep it at this and I'm going to press OK. Now this has been created. All right. So now I'm going to just click on close and apply. Let's delete this earlier visualization. Instead, I'm going to use that new mapping table here that we created. Now, if I go to the modeling tab, you will observe that Power BI has automatically connected my prod churn table with the mapping table via the age column. Okay. So which means even if I use the age group from this table, I will be able to fetch correct numbers from the prod churn table. Okay. So I'm going to use age group from this and I'm going to use two metrics now. First one would be total customers and second one will be churn rate, because I would like to compare my churn rate against the number of customers that we have. And instead of a table view, let's create line and stacked column chart. And in this, I'm going to use this churn rate column inside the line y-axis. Now, if you see, it has created a line on the y-axis using my churn rate column. Now, these two are for my demographic. Now, let's move on to the account info. For account info, the first thing that I would like to create is payment method. So again, I'm going to use prod churn. And from this, I'm going to use the payment method column. Let's use a clustered bar chart here. And I'm going to use the churn rate again. Now let's create a chart for contracts. I'm going to use this contract column here. Again, a clustered bar chart and the churn rate. The next chart I would like to create in account information is something with the tenure of the customer. For this purpose, if I use this tenure in months column, if you look at this, the tenure in months column has a lot of information or a lot of values in it, similar to age or monthly charges, right? So if I create a visualization with this, I might have a problem. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to create a bucket for tenure similar to what we did for age. Okay. So let's go back to transform data. I'm going to right click on prod churn again. And again, I'm going to take a reference. This time I'm going to name it as mapping underscore tenure GRP. Okay. And select this tenure in months column here. Right click and click on remove other columns. Select this, remove duplicates. And once done, I'm going to create that new custom column. Let's call this tenure group. And the condition is very simple again. If the tenure is less than 6, then 6 months. If it's less than 12, then 6 to 12 months. If it's less than 18, then 12 to 18 months. If it's less than 24, then 18 to 24 months. Everything else is greater than equal to 24 months. Okay. Now that's fine. I'm going to press on OK and then close and apply. Now that new table is created, I'm going to use the tenure group column from this. And again, if I go to the modeling tab, Power BI has automatically created the connection using the tenure in months in both the tables. So I'm going to use tenure group from this. Let's have a line and stacked column chart. And then in this, first metric would be total customers. And second one would be churn rate, similar to what we did for age. And again, I'm going to drag this churn rate into line y-axis so that it can create this line that you see here on the y-axis. Now, I don't know whether you have noticed this or not. If you look at the x-axis on this, the axis is not perfectly sorted. And even if I try to sort it, let's sort it by tenure group. It says 6 to 12, 18 to 24, 12 to 18, greater than 24 and less than 6. It is not in order. So how can we achieve an order inside x-axis when it is a categorical column and not a number column? Because right now what it's doing is it's simply sorting it alphabetically, but that's not what we want. The first item should be less than 6, then 6 to 12, then 12 to 18, 18 to 24, and then greater than 24. And this is the same case with the above chart as well. So if I sort this by the basis of age group, everything goes haywire, right? So to achieve this, I'm going to go back to the transform data step. We're going to add a new column to both age group mapping and tenure group mapping. Let's first add it on age group mapping. Go to add column, custom column. I'm going to call this age group sorting. And the condition is if age group is less than 20, then 1. Else if it's 20 to 35, then 2. Else if it's 35 to 50, then 3. Else 4. Okay. Now let's press OK. Again, this column is a text column. So we're going to change it to a number column so that we can use it to sort our final x-axis. So I'm going to click on this and select whole number, and that is it. Same thing I'm going to do in mapping tenure group. I'm going to call this tenure group sorting, and the condition is again similar. It will say if it's less than 6 months, then 1. If it's 6 to 12 months, then 2. 12 to 18, 3. 18 to 24, 4. Else 5. Okay. All right, perfect. I'm going to press on OK. Now again, I'm going to change the data type to whole numbers for the new column. Now let's close and apply. It's going to update that new column in the data model. Once done, come to the new column that we created. Come to the column that you actually want to sort. So in this case, let's say you want to sort the age group, which is in the x-axis. I'm going to click on age group. Now in the column tools at the top, select on sort by columns, and in this, select age group sorting, the new column that we created. Okay. Now, if you notice, this sorting has changed. Let's check if it's working or not. I'm going to select this 3 dots icon, sort the axis in ascending order. And as you see, it is working perfectly fine. Less than 20, 20 to 35, 35 to 50, and then greater than 50. The same thing I'm going to do in this chart, which is tenure group. I'm going to select tenure group from here, sort by column, tenure group sorting. And let's check sort axis. Tenure group is already selected here. Okay. I'm going to say sort ascending. So it's not working here. Let's see what's happening. Okay. So I'm going to click on transform data again. And in this, I'm going to select this tenure group. Now this is the column that we created. Okay. The new column that we created, let's go to that and click on this gear icon to select these settings which we applied. Now in this, I see the problem here. What we did was we use the tenure in month column to check the logic. Instead, what we should have done was we should have used tenure group. Okay. Press OK. Now it should work. Alright, I think it's working now. Let's sort the axis in an ascending fashion. Alright, perfect. So now this is also working. Now let's move on to the next section, which is your geographic. So we're going to use the state column inside a clustered bar chart, and we're going to use the churn rate metric. Okay. Now the problem here is because there are a lot of states here, it's going to occupy a lot of space. Okay. And I think what we should focus here on is to show the top 5 states with the highest churn rate. And later on, if we decide to maybe show all the numbers, we can do that as well. Only problem would be that we will have a scroll bar at the right, which is again not a problem. But for now, I'm going to just keep it to top 5. Later on, we can decide whether we have to, increase the number or show all the states here. So to show the top 5, the simplest way is to go to filters, select the state here, and in the drop down here, instead of basic filtering, select top n. Enter 5 here, and then add the value by which we need the top 5. So we are using churn rate. So I'm going to use churn rate itself and press apply. So now it has given me 5 states with highest churn rate. Okay. Now for the next category, which is churn distribution, I'm going to use the churn category column that we have here. Again, I'm going to use the clustered bar chart. This time I'm going to use the total churn metric here. Okay. The reason I'm using total churn and not churn rate is because this is churn category, which means everything in this column is churn data. So if I apply a churn rate onto this, everything would be 100%. So we don't want that. Okay. And also, if you look at this, there are 2 other here. Okay. The first other, this belongs to the churn category, which means that the rows where we have other, there we don't know what was the churn category. But these others, I think we did make a mistake while we were removing null values in our SQL Server. Instead of others, we should have written something else here, but it's okay. At least we can distinguish between others and other. Okay. So this others is nothing but all the null values which were there earlier, and we replaced it with others. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a filter onto this, which is again churn category, and I'm going to remove this others from this. Okay. Perfect. Now the final category we're going to cover is service used. I'm going to use the internet type column, which is here. And along with this, I'm going to use the churn rate again. So we're going to use a clustered bar chart, place it right here. And in the last view, I want to show all the services in the data which have an entry of yes and no, okay, and somehow create a visual which can summarize all those services. Like for example, if I go back to the data here, we see the customer is using so many services like phone service, multiple lines, internet service, internet type, online security, online backup, device protection plan, and all those, right? And every other column has the same entry, which is yes or no. I'm going to somehow use these entries and create a visual which can accumulate all this information into one visual. Okay. Now, if I create a chart with this, it's going to be a mess. So I prefer using a grid on this one. Before I can use a grid, I need to transform this data in some way so that I can easily pull that numbers onto the grid. Okay. Because right now, if I try, I would have to insert all these columns inside the grid, and I do not have enough space to accommodate all of that columns here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's go to transform data. And again, in this product churn, I'm going to right click on references, and this new table, I'm going to name it as prod underscore services. Okay. Select all the columns which have those services in them. So like for example, phone service, multiple line, internet service, online security. By the way, I'm selecting all these columns by pressing on Control and then simply clicking it with my mouse. Once you have selected all these columns, you need to click on Transform and then click on Unpivot Columns. What this will do is it will convert all those columns into rows. So now you only have 2 columns. One is attribute and second one is value. And along with that, you have all the other columns that were already there. Now remember, once you do that, the number of rows will increase substantially. So earlier, when you see the customer ID column in product churn table, it will be a unique value, but now it is not. If you see 11098 is being repeated multiple times. That is because this one entry has been repeated multiple times because of this unpivoted column. But this is not a problem for us. I'm going to explain why. Now I'm going to simply rename these columns because it will be easier for me to identify. I'm going to call this services, and the value column I'm going to call status. Okay, close and apply. The new table has been added to my data model, which is here. From this, I can go ahead and select the service column which we just created, which is this. Now if you see, all the services that a customer has is now in our rows instead of columns, okay, which is a great help to show the numbers. And then the final status column, I'm going to keep it inside the column, okay. But before doing that, I'm going to convert this into a matrix view, okay, which is again a tabular view, but with some additional features. I'm going to use this status column here and drag it onto the column section, and then use the churn status column, which we created in the first step. If you remember, in prod churn, we created a new column called churn status. We're going to use that column because that column contains numbers, ones and zeros, right? So we're going to use that. So anything which is churned, it's going to have 1. So I'm going to use that churn status column in the values here. I do not want a simple sum. I want the percentage of rows. So I want to see what percentage of values a particular service have in terms of churn status in yes and no. Okay. So I'm going to select this value section here, and inside this, go to show values as, and I'm going to select percent of row total. Okay. If you just kept it at numbers, you remember this table has duplicate entries in it. So numbers does not make sense, but percentage wise, it remains the same. Now, finally, all the charts that I want in this summary page is there. I would like to add 2 more things. First one, I would like to add a couple of drop downs. First one would be the monthly charge drop down. And I'm going to use the new column that we created for this, which was the range. Okay. So I'm going to use the monthly charge status column here. Select anywhere on the blank page here and select the monthly charge status, which we created at the very beginning. And then instead of this plain grid, I'm going to use a slicer. Go to slicer setting and convert this into a drop down. Now, instead of calling this monthly charge status, let's call this monthly charge range. That makes much more sense. Then I'm going to use another drop down for the marital status of the customer. Again, a slicer. Lastly, in the churn distribution chart that we have, we are missing an essential information, which is we got a more drill down data in this category, which is churn reason. Okay. And we have used only the churn category. I would also like to use the churn reason along with this. But since I do not have enough space here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another sheet here by clicking on this plus icon. I'm going to call this churn reason. Go to page setting, canvas setting. In the type, choose it as a tooltip. Go back to your table, which is prod churn, and insert the churn reason column, which is here. And along with that, insert total churn from the measures. Adjust it a little bit. And don't worry, we're gonna format all of these in a while and make it more beautiful. Go back to your main page. Let's rename this page now. And let's call this summary. Let's select this chart, which is the churn category chart. And I'm gonna add a tooltip onto this chart in a way that when someone hovers over this, that person will be able to see that new page that we created, which is churn reason. Okay. So for that, I'm gonna go to setting of this chart, general, go to tooltip, and instead of this auto, I'm going to select churn reason, which is the new page that we created as a tooltip. Now, if I hover over this, it will automatically filter the data based on the series that you are currently hovering upon. So right now I'm on competitors. It has filtered only the competitor related data in churn reason. Again, let's go to attitude and it has filtered again. Now I'm able to view all the data that I want on the summary page. All right, perfect. Now the next thing is obviously to beautify this entire page so that it's much more pleasing to the eye to view. All right, so when you start thinking about beautifying your dashboard, the first thing that you should think about is the colors that you're going to use in your dashboard. Because in most of the organization, they have a predefined set of colors which they use in their brand. So if you use any other color, then you might have to rework on your dashboard, because once you show your dashboard to the end user, they might reject that. So the first thing that you should do is decide on the colors that you will be using. Do not overcomplicate this. Choose 2 or 3 colors to the max, because if you choose multiple colors, it will be very difficult for you to manage the dashboard. Okay. So I have some predefined colors that I would like to use. I'm going to change the colors of these charts first, and I'll show you how I'm doing this in the formatting tab of those charts. Okay. So let's start with this donut chart. To change the colors, select the chart here and select on format your visuals. Within this, there's an option called slices. Select that, and now you'll get these 2 options. Because you only have 2 slices, that is why you're getting only 2 options here. So I'm gonna change the color for female to this color and the male this color. Okay, and I'm gonna use these colors across. Now once you have set the colors, I would also like to change the header size here, because this is too big to be adjusted properly. So I'm gonna reduce this size to maybe a 12, and the data label for this, which is inside this detail labels values, I'm gonna keep this at 9. Okay, let's check some other attributes as well. I'm gonna check the legend size here. I think the legend size is okay. Let me just reduce it further. Yeah, I think this is also okay. Also, I might want to add an underline to the title here. So let's go to the title. In this, just click on this underline. Okay, now let's move on to the next chart, which is your churn rate by payment method. Again, I'm going to go to the format section, general section, title, and reduce the title size to 12. Underline this. Here, I do not want this y-axis title here, and neither do I want the x-axis title here. Okay, you might want to choose to keep them on. It's up to you. But for now, I'm going to just remove it and show you how to do that. I'm going to click on y-axis. I'm going to click on title. So this is the place where it gets controlled. I'm going to just simply turn it off. And again, for x-axis title, I'm going to turn it off. Okay. I'm going to change the color of the series to that dark blue color that we were using. So let's go to bars, and instead of this color, I'm going to use this color. Okay. And the good thing is, once you have used this color somewhere, you will always find this color again in your recent color option. So you do not have to paste the hex code again and again to get that color. You can simply choose it from here. Also, I don't want these x-axis numbers. Instead, I would like to have data labels. So I'm going to choose data labels from here. Remove the x-axis values. So now it looks okay to me. Now let me show you a good trick when you have to apply the same formatting across same kind of charts. Okay. So for example, I'm going to just click on this chart here, click on Format Painter, and then click on this bottom chart. Automatically, everything that you applied on this chart gets applied on the bottom chart as well. I'm going to do this again for this chart, this one, and this one. Also, if you notice, this chart says churn rate by state, but actually this is churn rate by state top 5. Okay. So I'm going to add that onto the title. So I'm going to click on this chart here, go to title, and after this state, I'm going to simply add top 5. Now again, I'm going to click on this chart again, click on Format Painter, format this chart as well. Finally, let's format this last table here, which is your services table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the basic formatting which Power BI anyways provide. Click on Format Your Visuals, and in layout, I'm going to select minimal. This gives me a clean table look, and then I'm going to select tabular. Once done, let's format some other features of it. Let's say, for example, I want to color this header row here. So for that, I'm going to click on this column headers, and in the background color, let's change it to this color. Also, the text color should be white, otherwise it not be visible. I'm going to choose a little darker white here. And in the bottom section, the numbers that it shows, it's showing 2 decimals. But if you notice, everywhere else, we are showing only single digit numbers. So I'm going to change this to single digit. The way you do that is by going to this specific column section. And within this, inside the values, just select the decimal places as 1. Also, this total does not make sense here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that. This is a column subtotal. So I'm going to just remove this. This total here at the bottom also does not make sense, which is a row subtotal. I'm going to turn this off as well. If you notice, all the charts have a title on it, but this grid does not. So I'm going to add a title to it. So to add a title, just go to General and turn on the title from here. And maybe we can add a title as Churn by Services. Reduce the size to 12 because that's what we've been using, and underline this, similar to other charts. Now, after looking at this grid, it looks okay, but it feels like something is still missing. It's because the numbers that it shows, things are not getting highlighted. I need something visual on this because there are so many numbers here. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to add a data bar onto this. Okay. Go to visuals again, select cell elements, and within this, you'll find this data bar option here. Just turn it on. Now the default color is this light blue color. I'm going to change this, which matches to my theme here. So let's choose a different color. I'm going to choose this color and I'm going to paste it into positive bar because all my values are anyways going to be positive. I would not have any negative values in this. And the negative bar and axis, I'm going to keep it as it is. Okay, I would not touch that. Now, if you see the values which it's showing is much more visible, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select this table here and I'm going to click on Format Painter, select this churn reason, format this table as well. Now, if you notice, we did add the tooltip earlier on this chart, but because we've copy pasted the formatting from other charts, I think the tooltip has disappeared. So what we have to do is just click on this chart, go to formatting, go to general, go to tooltip, and then from this, select this churn reason. Now, if I hover upon this series, it will show me the tooltip which we have just formatted. Looks pretty nice now, right? All right, let's continue. Now, I feel that we should add a background to this dashboard so that it looks more appealing. So what I've done is I have created a PowerPoint slide. I have simply added few shapes to this. These are just simple shapes that you can create on your own. By the way, I will be providing all the files that I am using in this video in the link in the description. You can just click on that link and download them. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this slide into a PNG image onto my system and then use that PNG file as a background to my dashboard. By the way, if you don't know how to export an PPT slide as a PNG, all you have to do is just go to File and click on Save As. And then in this pop-up window, select a PNG format from this drop-down, which is here, and then name your file name and then save. And that's it. Once you have saved that slide as a PNG, select anywhere on the dashboard where it's empty white space and go to the Format Your Report page, go to Canvas Background, and here you'll find this Image Browse section and select the file that you just saved. Once you select, you will most probably will not see that immediately. To see that, what you have to do is reduce the transparency to 0%. And now you'll be able to see background that you just created. Now, as of now, this does not look good. So what we'll do is we'll remove the background from all these cards at the top. Okay. Just select the card, come to formatting option, general, and then click on effects and unselect this background. Okay. Again, the text is in black color. I'm going to change that. Go to category label, change the label as this darker white color and the call out value to a white color. Now I'm going to select this card again, click on Format Painter, format all the other cards similarly. Adjust the card a little bit so that it fits your design. So I'm going to quickly do that. All right, it looks good now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the background from these chart as well and align it so that it aligns with our background. To remove the background again, I'm going to go to general for each chart and in effects, you're going to find that background option. Let's align it so that it fits our entire theme. All right. So I'm done with this page now, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. We have a beautiful dashboard with us, and it has all the features and all the filtering capabilities. One thing that I might want to improve is this donut chart because it still looks a bit blank. So I'm going to do is I'm going to add an image onto this, which can represent this particular donut chart appropriately. So I'm going to add a gender related image onto it. Go to insert and click on image. Again, the image that I'm using will be provided in the link in the description. You can use that. And from this, I'm going to use this image, place it over this and maybe reduce the size a little bit. Align it in a way that it does not interact with your chart. And maybe if possible, just send it towards the back. So click on format, click on this send backwards option, click on send back. Okay. What it will do is it will place that image at the back end of the chart so that when the user is actually interacting with your donut chart, they don't accidentally click on that image. Okay. Now, if you notice, everything is working fine. All the interactions is happening properly. Now, one more thing that I would like to show you is when you click on certain chart here and every other chart gets filtered, you might notice that it's not filtering it completely. It's basically highlighting the section which is getting filtered, right? If you want to change that, all you have to do is just click on the chart, go to format, and within format, you'll find this edit interaction. Click on edit interaction, and then you will find this small filter button here, right? Right now it's selected on this highlight button. Instead of this, I'm going to just select on filter button. I'm going to do this for remaining charts as well. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to turn this edit interaction off. Now, whenever I select this button here, every other chart will get filtered instead of just getting highlighted. But remember, this is getting applied on just this chart. Okay. If I select this chart now, the highlighting option is still on for this chart. So you would have to edit the interaction for every chart individually. All right. For now, I'm going to leave it as it is. You know how to do it. So in case you require, you can anyways do it, right? Now comes the interesting part. Let's start analysis part of this dashboard. Now, once you start analyzing the numbers and seeing the visuals, one thing that I usually do is utilize the AI features which are there in Power BI. The AI visuals gives you a good starting point before you actually dig deeper into your data. So all you have to do is once you have created your visual on your page, you can just come to this narrative view here and click on this narrative view. It will give you a pop-up like this. And within this, you can just click on custom. Now what it's doing is it's giving you a summary of your entire visual. You can read through all the insights that it's giving you and then start with your data drilling. And the good thing about this is when you filter some data, the narrative will also change here as well. Okay, so this is directly related to this. Let me just remove this filter right now. Let's read a couple of the insights it's giving us. It says at 2838, greater than 50 had the highest total customers and was 2,325% higher than less than 20. In itself, this information does not give us a lot, but if I look at these two charts here, I can observe that the female population are the 64% of the entire Churner list. And in addition to that, if I click on this female slice here, I can see that out of those female, 31.5% were in the greater than 50 age group, which means if I specifically design a marketing campaign which focuses on female greater than 50 demographic, then I would be able to save this much customers and stop them from churning. Okay, perfect. Now, do not entirely base your analysis on the AI narrative. This is just a starting point. Okay, trust me, AI is just there to increase your productivity. If you completely rely on AI to do your analysis, then you will fail at some point. Okay, so let AI be the starting point. Once you have got this, you can either remove this, okay, or you can keep it as it is, whichever you choose. Now let's analyze the data further. Okay, so I have this filter applied on female and greater than 50. If I notice this geographic chart, right, the geography does not change much. Even if I remove the filter, the top 5 states with the most churners does not change with these filters. Okay, it still remains the same state. So for this demographic, the state does not matter. Now, if you observe further for this demographic, I can see that 496 of these customers were getting churned because of competitor. Now, if I analyze further on this category and hover upon this series, I can see that 180 of them were churning because competitor had better devices and 183 were churning because competitor made better offers. So now I know that these are the two categories I need to work upon to stop those customers from churning. As simple as that, right? And this is a very good analysis to provide in your final presentation to the stakeholder. Now let's look at some other charts. I'm gonna focus my attention on this grid here. This seems pretty interesting to me. In this grid, I'm gonna consider anything greater than 60% to be a red flag for me, okay? So if any of the categories have more than 60%, I should look at those services, okay? Now 60% is just something that I personally created as a benchmark. This can be different in your organization. This can be different in your analysis, okay? So this is something that I'm just taking as an example. Device protection plan, online backup, online security, premium support, and streaming music. People who have not subscribed to these services are more likely to churn than people who have subscribed these, okay? Similarly, internet service, paperless billing, phone services, and unlimited data. These four areas where people have subscribed, they are more likely to churn, which means their services is not up to the mark. So when we are designing a marketing campaign, we need to look at these services and come out with ways with which we can improve these services. So these are few ways by which you can analyze your data and provide insights to your stakeholders. Now 90% of us will stop at this stage. And don't get me wrong, this is a very good stage to stop at and present your findings to the stakeholders, okay? But we're gonna take this one step beyond. I'm gonna introduce you to a machine learning algorithm which we can use with this data and then use that final machine learning output, which will be a predictive output, to predict future churners. Now, if you imagine, this would be a very good selling point for your project because not only you are analyzing your historical data, you're also providing the stakeholder with a means to identify certain customers who are more likely to churn in coming months. Exciting, right? So let's go. So before we begin building our machine learning model, I would like to give you a small introduction to the algorithm that we'll be using, that is random forest. In machine learning, there are a lot of algorithms available. However, the reason I choose to go with random forest is because it is simple to understand and it is one of the most widely used models when it comes to churn analysis. So what is random forest? Imagine that in your daily routine while going to work, you're trying to decide what to wear based on the weather. And we are going to visualize your thought process in a flowchart. So you ask yourself, is it raining outside? If your answer is yes, then you wear a raincoat. If no, then you move on to the next question. Then you again ask yourself, is it cold? If your answer is yes, then you wear a jacket, else you wear a t-shirt. Now in the world of machine learning, this entire process is called a decision tree algorithm. Now random forest is like having a team of decision trees working together and choosing the best possible outcome. Imagine you're trying to decide which movie to watch, but instead of asking just one friend, you ask your entire group of friends and then decide based on majority votes. Random forest works exactly like that. It first trains multiple decision trees on different random subset of data. Then it uses random subset of questions at each tree to make it more diverse. Finally, it gets the results from each tree and choose the outcome based on majority votes. And that is it. Hope you got a high-level idea of random forest with that small introduction. Now, to build our model, we will use an application called Jupyter Notebook, and we will write our code in Python 3.0 and above. Also, just a quick disclaimer before starting. I'm also in a learning journey when it comes to machine learning. I have acquired this knowledge by reading multiple articles and online resources. So if I make any mistake, then I would request you to let me know in the comment section so that we can learn and improve our skills together. So since that's out of the way now, let's start building our machine learning model. Alright, so to create a machine learning algorithm, first we need to decide the data that we're going to use to run our machine learning model on, so that it gets trained, and the data on which it will predict whether a customer will get churned or not. Now if you remember, in the beginning we created two views in SQL Server. This is where we're going to use it. So what I'm going to do is I've opened up this Excel file here, and I'm going to click on data, and within this I'm going to select on database SQL Server. Okay, now if you remember, we have our SQL Server name copied somewhere, so I'm going to just copy paste that server name here on the server, and I'm going to also copy paste the database name, which was DB churn. Press OK. Now in the next pop-up you should see this database that you're working with, which is DB churn. Expand this, and then you will be able to see the views that we created. First one was churn data and second one was view join data. I'm going to import both these views on this Excel file by selecting the view, and once selected, I'm going to simply click on this load button here. This should ideally load all the data onto your Excel file here, and it will also name your sheet accordingly. Similarly, I'm going to import the view join data as well on this file. So now I have these two data within this Excel file. I'm going to save this Excel file as prediction data, and wherever you are saving this file, just keep a note of the file path. We're going to use that file path while creating our machine learning algorithm. Okay, so to create our machine learning model, we will be using Jupyter Notebook, which is installed locally on my system. Now, in case you do not have Jupyter Notebook installed already, or you do not know how to do that, I will leave a link in the description which will explain you in detail how to do that. Now, once you have installed that on your system and you opened it, this is the first window that you will see. Okay. Now within this, you just have to click on this new and click on Python 3 IPY kernel, because we will be working with Python 3. That's the latest version of Python which is available. Now this is a new notebook that we have, and the space that you see here, this is called a cell. Okay. Now within this, we can write our Python codes. The first step that we're going to take is to import certain libraries and load our data into our Python environment. If you want to comment any line in your Jupyter Notebook, the keyword for commenting is this hash sign. I'm going to copy paste a code, and I'm going to explain each and every code one line at a time. So if you look at the first few lines, these are simply importing the libraries that we require to run our data processing steps and eventually create a model. Now, libraries are pre-made packages of code which Python provides, which you can call and use in your certain use case. Okay. Now, in case while running this code, you end up with an error stating that a particular class of library is not available, that means you have not installed that library on your system yet. In order to install, I'll place a code on this screen now, which you can use. You can run this code on the terminal window of your system and install all the libraries before you import them. Okay. So once you imported the library, the next line is simply defining the path where you have kept your raw data file, which was the prediction_data Excel file. And after that, we are simply defining the sheet name. Now this is using view_churn data because we will be training and testing our model based on this data first. Next line, we're simply using those two parameters, which is file path and sheet name, inside pd.readExcel. This is a function within the pandas library here, where we can read Excel files, and we are reading it into a data frame called data. Now data frame are simply a method to store tabular information within Python. And the last line will give you few lines from the top as a preview so that you can know if your data has been loaded correctly or not. So let's run this. Now to run a piece of code within Jupyter Notebook, you can either click on this small button here, or else you can use a shortcut which is Shift and Enter, which will execute the entire code and add another cell below this particular cell so that you can write your next code into it. So I'm going to use that shortcut now, Shift Enter. So the code is getting executed now, and a new cell has also been added at the bottom. Okay. Now if you see, we did not receive any errors. everything ran perfectly fine, and it has given us a preview of the data which has been loaded. Now, since we have already seen this data in SQL Server, we know that this is correct. So we can now safely move forward. The next step is data processing. Again, I'm going to paste few lines of code and explain it to you one by one. Let's start from the top here. So what we are doing here is, from our data frame which we created in the previous step, we are dropping few columns. The reason we are dropping these columns is because we would not want these columns to be used for our prediction. Now, what are these columns? First one is customer ID. I'm simply removing this because I do not want any bias in the prediction model. Because customer ID is just a number assigned to each customer, I don't want my model to consider that column as a predictor variable. Then you have churn category and churn reason. I've removed this because these are directly related to the target variable, which means the thing that we are trying to predict, which is the customer status. These two columns are directly related to that. So not relevant for the model. Now in the next line of code, before I explain this, let me give you a bit of background here. When you consider a normal machine learning model like random forest, these are very bad at reading categorical information. So before you actually create your model, it is very important for us to convert all categorical columns into numerical columns. And doing that manually is a tedious task. So what we're going to do is, we're going to store all the list of columns that you want to convert into numerical values into this list called columns to encode. And then in the next piece of code, we're using this function called label encoder, which we have actually imported in this library here. And then we're going to use that to convert all these columns into numerical values. Now, one thing to understand about using this particular library is that it encodes the values of each item in a column based on alphabetical order. For example, I'll take this gender column. When this line of code runs, it currently has two values, male and female. It sorts it alphabetically, which means female comes first, then male, and then assigned a value of 0 to female and 1 to male. This is very crucial because the target variable which we are trying to predict is also a categorical column. So if you remember, the customer status column has two values in it, churned or stayed. So we need to convert that as well into numerical values. But if we use this method, churned will be converted to 0 and stayed will be converted to 1. Now it's not a problem at all, but as a general practice, whatever we are trying to predict, in this case churned, we should code it as 1 and stayed as 0. So that's why the reason I have not included customer status in this list of columns here. Instead, after we have encoded all these columns through this label encoder, I have used another line of code to encode customer status column manually, and I'm going to map the value of 0 to stayed and 1 to churned. Now the next line of code is splitting our data into features and targets. Now sometimes we call features and targets as independent variables and dependent variables. Both are the same. Now what we are doing here is, in X, we are storing all the columns but dropping customer status column, which is our target. And in Y, we are storing only customer status column. So Y will be our target, X will be our features. Then in the last line, we are splitting the data into training and test data sets. So basically what happens is, when you have a data and we're trying to train a model on that data, we should have a set of data on which we should also test that data, right? So that is why out of 100% of the data, we can take 80% of the data as training data set, which means our model will be trained on that 80% and remaining 20% can be kept as a test data set. So once the model has been trained, we will test our model on that 20%. And that is exactly what we're doing here. We're creating X train, X test, Y train, Y test. And then we are splitting the data using train test split, again a library that we imported. And the test size is 0.2, which is 20%. The last line, which is random state 42, this is very important. This is a control measure to keep a check on the randomness of your model training process, which means every time that I run this code, I'll use the same number so that results are reproducible. Now you can choose any other number, that does not matter. But every time you run the code, ensure to keep that same number so that you can reproduce your output. Alright, so now run this section of code. So there is no error here, which means everything ran perfectly fine. At this stage, let me just quickly save this notebook so that we do not lose our work. So what you have to do to save this notebook is just click here. And instead of this, let me just say churn prediction and click on rename. That's it. The next section is where we will be training our random forest model. Now this is very simple. We're using the random forest classifier, again a library that we imported, to create our model, and we've named our model rf_model. The n estimator, this line, if you remember, our random forest model consists of multiple decision trees. Now this is the parameter where we decide how many decision tree this model should prepare. Okay, now 100 means it will contain 100 decision trees, and then evaluate the performance or evaluate the output from all those 100 decision trees and then give us the result. Again, the random state will be 42. I'm going to keep it as same so that my output is reproducible. And finally, I'm going to train my model using rf_model.fit, and then I'm using the train dataset that we created at the above step. Now let me run this code now. Everything ran perfectly fine. Now the next section is where we will be evaluating our model. The first line is where we are making a prediction on the test dataset. We are storing the predicted output from this particular line into ypred. Then we are evaluating the model using confusion matrix and classification report. I'll explain the output of these two in a while, because this is very important process or important step for you to understand your model performance. Then this is an optional step, but I wanted to include this. Basically what we're doing is we are kind of checking the importance of all the features that we have included in our model. Okay, so if you go up and see, these are the features that we have included in our model. Okay, these are the list of columns that we consider as an important factor to predict our churn status. So I would also like to understand, while the model has been prepared, how much weightage each of these column has in predicting that output. Now there is a lot of maths involved in the backend. Let's not get into that. All we have to do is just see how much importance each of those columns have in your final prediction. Okay, so for that purpose, I'm actually storing the importance here and sorting the importance from highest to lowest, and then plotting all that importance into a chart. So let's run this. All right, so now let's look at the output. Let's start with this confusion matrix. Okay, what this is saying is it helps to visualize the performance of your model. Now each row of the matrix represents the actual class, while each column represents predicted class. Okay, so if I explain this, now this 783 number, this represents true negative, which means it correctly predicted class 0 783 times. The second one, 64, this is false positive, which means 64 times it incorrectly predicted class 1, which is churned. Next is 126. This is false negative. It incorrectly predicted class 0, which is stayed, 126 times. Next is true positive, which means 229 times it correctly predicted class 1, which is churned. Now moving on to the classification report. For class 0, which is stayed, precision says 0.86, which is 86%, which means that 86% of the instances predicted as class 0 are actually class 0. Okay, so this is the precision of the model, how precise the model predicts your output. Similarly, 78% is for churned. Then comes the recall. This simply means that 92% of the actual class 0 instances are correctly predicted as class 0. Now this might seem similar to precision, but there's a difference in the formula to calculate both of them. I will include those formulas here on the screen so that you can quickly glance through. Now moving on, it also says that it has 65% of actual class 1 instances are correctly predicted as class 1. Okay. Moving to the F1 score, this is the harmonic mean of precision and recall, providing a balance between the two. The score is 89% for 0, which is stayed, and 71% for 1, which is churned. Support is actually the number of instances that we had in our data to make this prediction. So 847 cases for 0 and 355 cases for 1. Finally is the accuracy, macro average and weighted average. So overall, our model is performing at 84% accuracy. The precision, recall and F1 score for class 0 are all higher than those of class 1, indicating that the model is better at predicting customer who will stay. Now this can be because of the imbalance in the support values. That is, class 0 has 847 instances while class 1 only had 355. If we can balance the data more, then I think the accuracy percentage of the model for churn will also increase. Now moving on to the next chart, which is feature importance. We are plotting the importance of each feature that we have included to create this model. Now, at times it happens when you create a model, the model is overfit, which means that it has learned the test dataset so well that it's predicting at a very high percentage level. But then when you give it a new dataset, everything falls apart. So when that happens, it's important for us to fine tune our model. And this is one way of fine tuning. You can remove certain features which you think are not important, because unnecessary feature addition can also reduce the accuracy of your model. So a common practice is to remove anything less than 0.01. And this benchmark is something which is flexible and can change according to requirements. And in order to remove this, remove these columns from the first step in data processing, which is dropping the columns, right? You can drop those columns as well from this step, okay? And also remember to drop these columns from this list as well. So I hope you understood how we evaluate our model. Now moving on to the next section, which is using a model to predict on a new data set. Again, I'm going to copy paste few lines of code. From the top, again, we are defining the file path and the sheet name. This time we are using view_join data. Then feeding those parameters in this data frame, which is new data, and reading the Excel file here. We are printing the first few lines of the new data. The next line, we are preserving our columns before it gets encoded. That is because once the model has predicted and is ready to extract the output, I want the original column names instead of ones and zeros, right? That will be much more easier for us to read through and visualize as well. So I'm preserving those columns here. Then I'm retaining the customer ID column, because if you remember, we are removing customer ID column from here. So if in the final predicted output, we do not have customer ID, once we try to visualize that data in Power BI again, it will be difficult for us to map our data against the existing data that we have. So this is again very important. Next, what we are doing is similar to what we did earlier. We are removing or dropping few columns which are not important for prediction, like customer ID, customer status, churn category, and churn reason. Then we are using the label encoder again. We're using the same columns which are stored in this step and using those list of columns in this step again, and it will encode all those columns. Finally, we are storing the prediction using this rf_model.predict new data and storing that information in new prediction. Then in the next line, we are getting the customer status predicted column and adding that onto the original data. And then in this line, we are applying a filter and saying, give me only those rows where the customer status predicted is 1. And if you remember, 1 means churned. And finally, we are just saving our output onto a CSV file with the mentioned path. So let's run this now. Alright, so everything ran without any error. Let's open up the predicted file now from the file path that we provided and see how the prediction looks like. So if you see, we have all the original categorical columns here, but at the end we have one column which says customer status predicted. And in this, if I apply a filter, it only contains 1. In total, it has predicted that 378 customers who were in the join data list will get churned eventually. Now, this number is very high, I agree. So again, model tuning is an important factor here. For now, I'm gonna stay with this and then we'll move on to Power BI to visualize this data and create a churner profile. Alright, let's go. Alright, so now let's talk about the second page of our Power BI, which will be our churn prediction. and we're going to decide the blueprint for that particular page and decide on the visualization that we would like. Now this is an open canvas for us because right now the only item that we are considered about was to ensure that we have a way or a means to predict future churners. Now we have done that, and now we just have to visualize the data that we have with us. So what I'm going to do is I need a grid kind of a view which will have my customer IDs, and I would like to include revenue related columns because that is something that we did not include in our first page. And because we are talking about churner profile, we would have to again include demographic related information for all those churners, service related informations, and geographic related information. So I'm going to include gender, age, tenure, payment, contract, and also state related data. But along with that, I would also like to include one more chart, which would be the marital status of those churners, just so that we can see if that has any specific impact in our overall analysis or not. So now that we have our blueprint ready, let's jump into the visualization part of this second page. Okay, so now I have my Power BI desktop window opened here. To create a new visualization, I need to first insert a new sheet here by clicking on this plus icon here. And I'm going to rename this as churn prediction. The first thing that we need to do is we need to import that new prediction file that we extracted from our Jupyter notebook, which was a CSV file, into this model. Now at this point, you can choose to import that CSV into the SQL Server and then connecting with your SQL Server directly, or else you can choose to directly connect with your CSV file. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to connect it directly to the CSV file. Okay. So to connect it, I'm going to click on get data, click on text CSV, browse the file, and then import it inside your Power BI model. This is going to show you a preview of the data. This is fine with me. I'm going to directly load it. After loading, I would like to create two quick measures which will help me count the total number of churners in my new data. So I'm going to go to measures, click on three dots icon, new measure. First one, I will call it as count predicted churner, and this will be a count of the customer ID column within our predictions table. Second, I'm going to create another measure which is similar to this count measure, but it's going to add a prefix text with that value. So I'm going to call this title predicted churner, and this will have a prefix text which says count of predicted churner. I'm going to just show you how we're going to use this, but let me just create the measure first. Again, count of customer ID in the prediction table. Okay, now we have created both these. Now, the first visualization that we wanted to create was a grid which contains customer ID and all the revenue related columns. Insert the customer ID column, total revenue, total refunds, and number of referrals. Okay. All right. We have added all of these now. Now I'm going to add that new measure that we created on top of this because I want to see the total number of customer IDs the model is predicting to be churned. So I'm going to use this title predicted count, put it inside a card, remove the category label, and maybe adjust the size of this text. I'm going to click on call out value and let's make this 15, and I'm going to make it bold. All right, perfect. Let's keep it right here for now. So now let's start building our churner profile. First one is the gender. Now instead of using a simple donut chart like this, I'm going to do something different. So let's insert the cards once more. And this time I'm going to use this count of predicted churners here. I'm going to insert a card here. And instead of saying count of predicted churner, I'm going to call this female. And in the filter section, I'm going to add gender from the predictions table onto this add data field. And now select only female. Next, I will do the same. Copy paste this card, rename this to male. And from this gender filter, I'm going to select male this time. Now let's move on to the next chart, which is age group. Now, because we have the age column in this prediction table, it will automatically get connected with the mapping age group table. So I'm going to just click on this mapping age group and then use the customer ID column from this prediction table. Let's convert this into a chart. I'm going to use this clustered column chart, move this customer ID to y-axis, and let's just name this as hash. Again, let's resize it a little bit so that we have some space for the next chart. Let's create a chart for marital status now. I'm going to use this married column and let's rename this X as marital status. Then let's create one more chart for tenure group. So I'm going to remove this marital status from here. And instead, from the mapping tenure group, I'm going to add the tenure group into the X field. Then let's add a chart for payment method and contract. And for contract, I'm going to use this clustered bar chart so that we have some space. Now finally, I'm going to create a chart for geography, which is by state. Now it's time to make this view a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So similar to the first page where we created a background in our PowerPoint, I've created a background for this page as well. I'm going to quickly import that background here and then work on making these visuals more appealing. So to import, again, click somewhere on the blank page here, go to Canvas, Canvas background, and then browse your image from this. Once you have imported, just remember to reduce the transparency to 0%. Now that you have all these here, I'm going to copy paste the formatting from my first page so that I have at least a starting point. Now once you format one chart, you will notice that because our background is this dark blue color, the series color is not that great. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the series color here. Now keep selecting that chart, go to formatting, go to bars, and within bars, I'm going to select this darker white color. And for the labels, which is the data labels, I'm going to go to values and select the white color. Also, let's change the color of these y-axis values and also the title. So y-axis, select this darker white color, and for title, you can go to general, title, and then change the color from here. Now, sometimes you might feel that your labels are not visible because of the chart alignment or any other factor. So you might want to change the data label color, but for now, I'm going to keep it like this only. Now let's use the format painter once more. Now in this, I would also like to add a border line to the charts. Go to general here, go to FX, and then go to visual borders and turn it on. Change the color to this darker white color. And I think now I can again use the format painter to format all the other charts again. Finally, this table also needs to be formatted. I'm going to use the same format from the first chart. And then in the grid, I just noticed that this is showing sum of monthly charge, but because I only have one row item for each customer ID here, I don't want a sum. I can just choose don't summarize from this. Also, one more formatting change in this grid I would like to do is add a different color to all alternate rows so that it's easier to identify each row item. So for that, what you need to do is come to values. In this alternate background color, I'm going to choose a darker white color here. Moving on, in this text at the top, which we added using that new measure, I'm going to remove the background. So go to general and in FX, remove this background. Now let's rearrange all the charts properly so that it fits your entire theme. Finally, this area looks a little bit blank to me. So I'm going to add one image here. So to add an image, I'm going to go to insert and then click on this image here. I'm going to use this image here, which represents the gender. Let's align it horizontally so that it fits properly. Go to formatting, go to align and click on distribute horizontally. Now one thing which is missing here is the navigation. I'm going to add two buttons, one here and one on the summary page to navigate to and fro from both these pages. Okay, let's just quickly do that now. I'm going to click on insert, go to shape and then use this rounded rectangle shape, place it here, and in the style, let's change the color to black, and in the text, let's turn this on and write summary. You can turn off the border if you like, and then in the action section, turn this on, come to this type drop down, choose page navigation, and the destination would be the summary page. Okay. Similarly, I'm going to add a same button onto the summary page as well. Alright, so the button have been added. Now let's check if it's working or not. I'm going to click on this churn prediction. Now because we are using Power BI desktop, simply clicking would not work. You would have to press Ctrl and press mouse left click. But once you publish this dashboard onto Power BI services, normal click will also work. And let's check the summary button here. Alright, perfect. So everything is working perfectly fine. Now if I want to filter any values from this, let's select a customer ID. It will filter everything and show you the profile of that particular customer. But one problem that I notice here is, once you select this, the measure that you added at the top, because this customer ID is a female, the female measure goes 1, but the male measure goes blank. This is something that I do not want. What we can do to avoid this is go to the measure once more, and we're using the count predicted measure here. Inside this, you just have to add a 0 here. So you just write +0 in that measure. Now if you notice, the measure will say 0 instead of blank. Perfect. So now we are good to go. We have finally completed our entire dashboard, and it gives us two very important pages. First one is an overall executive summary, which is this page, which gives you an overall idea of the entire data set. And then finally, a unique selling point for a project, which is your future churners, which it's predicting using your random forest model and then visualizing the entire thing inside this churner profile. With that, we have finally completed our churn analysis project. It took me a while to prepare this entire project for you. So if you're liking this content, then do consider subscribing to the channel and hit that notification bell icon so that you do not miss any content that I upload. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.